Hello, this is Paris Underground Radio. My name is Annette Deleu, and this is The Heart of You. In today's episode, we are talking to Talisa from Elysium Rituals and towander.com. This is our second part of our Divination series, and I'm so thrilled to have Talisa on air today because she's going to be talking to us about runes. So I would like you to welcome Talisa to the show. How are you, Talisa?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. Thank you for being on. I wanted to sort of start from the beginning and talk to you a little bit about your divination history, because since that's what this two-part series is about, is divination overall. I wanted you to give the listeners a little snapshot of what the first forms of divination you started using and how you got started.
Okay, so the first forms of divination were tarot and astrology. But as we were discussing earlier, they weren't the first forays into my spiritual journey, say. So I'd always been a spiritual person and been interested in spirituality, and when I was younger, especially more things related to spell work and things of this nature. But divination came to me about 3 years ago, and it started with tarot and astrology. And it started with tarot because it's something that I've always been fascinated with, but I thought it was like almost prohibitive, like you couldn't access it, say, as a mere mortal. It had to be passed down by like your like ancient lineages and whatever. And it's funny because I knew so little about tarot, and it was like a scary thing, actually. Like, what would you be told in a tarot reading? When I got my first deck, I was just instantly at home. I was like, yes, like this is me, this is mine. I am this. Like, why have I never come to this before? I felt so comfortable with it, and it just spoke to me. It spoke to me a lot. And it was only after a while that I'd been like experimenting. In the beginning, you're like just hungry for all the knowledge. I was like reading up on everything. And then after a while, I discovered that it had originated in Italy. And I didn't know that at the time. And I'm Italian. And I think part of why it felt like coming home so much is that there was some kind of, in like the collective unconscious, the wisdom that's passed through our DNA. I feel it just made so much sense to me as well, like that aspect. I feel like that's how it just, like a fish to water. I really felt like coming home to it. And like we were saying earlier, that I couldn't believe I'd never done this before almost, and it's only been 3 years. So yeah, that was for tarot. Astrology, I actually used to be a skeptic, and it's almost like a shame, like tarot and astrology have both got this like bad rap sometimes. Like, I had no idea what astrology was. I'd only read horoscopes in the newspaper, which, as we know, if you know anything about astrology, is like...
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And so I just thought it was all made up and like just, based on nothing. And then I'm not even sure how. I guess it's, it's one of those things that just comes to you when you're ready for it, really. And I just started being curious and learning, and like, again, just the world was open to me, and I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe the level of intricacy and detail, knowledge and wisdom that could be found in this method. And yeah, it seemed like such a shame that it's almost, it's definitely changing now, like for sure. But before it didn't seem like something real, almost. I didn't feel tangible. And then when I started looking into it, I just realized how accurate it was, how you could see it manifest not only in yourself but in events around you.
Absolutely. And what you're saying is 100% true, that both astrology and tarot have gotten such sort of a negative stigma surrounding it. And that is part of what this podcast is here to do as well, is to sort of demystify all of that for people who may be curious and may not necessarily understand exactly how tarot is used, how astrology is used, and how runes are used, and all sorts of divination tools, because they are 100% always here to help you. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because of the witch trials, maybe it's because of a lot of things that have happened in history that sort of vilified all of these ways of speaking to the divine and speaking to the universe. People became really afraid. And so I think now is the time to debunk that myth and say, you know what, that it's completely untrue. There's nothing evil or bad about any of it. And, you have to obviously protect yourself and, clear your energy and that sort of thing, which I did an episode on earlier in the season. But for the most part, it is always a way that is going to help you in your life.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's accessible. It's for everyone and it's available to everyone because it is a mystical experience and it is spiritual, but we are spiritual. We are mystical, we are the universe, we are magic in motion. And so all of this is accessible to everyone. It's not, it's not just for like the select few, say. And it is definitely changing a lot now, but still people are always afraid with tarot and natal chart readings. Like, there's a lot of fear about what you will be told or what can be shown to you. But like we always say in these worlds, that nothing is ever set in stone as well. It's just giving you the guidance and you can choose whether or not to follow that. And it's empowering.
It is. And I would like to add to that, it is a snapshot of what is currently going on in this moment. And that is something I tell all of my clients, and I've covered before, that it doesn't mean that this is a foregone conclusion, that this is absolutely something that is going to happen that you can never change. The guidance is there to help you make the decisions and change course if you want to change course, if you want a different outcome. And the one thing that I remember when I first got a tarot reading was I remember thinking, oh, I want to make sure I get somebody who is legitimate, who knows exactly what they're doing and is a real psychic. And this was, a long, long time ago. And I just, at this point, I kind of laugh at it because every person who is reading tarot has the ability to do it. It's just a matter of if their particular interpretation is resonating with where you're at this moment. So that's why I do love to interview and bring in various different practitioners, because if somebody, let's say, is wanting to get a reading with you, that's because whatever you are saying is 100% resonating with them at this moment, and they're feeling that energetic connection with you. And so they're going to hear this podcast and they're going to say, oh my gosh, I want to get a tarot or astrology or rune reading with you. So it is all about that energetic match and who you're guided to contact in regards to getting the reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you're ready, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. So I think you will always be presented with who you need to hear the message from, and in the way you need to hear the message as well. Because like they say, there are no bad cards in tarot, and everything holds a lesson and an invitation as well. So there aren't many difficult, negative and challenging cards in the tarot, but that's because life is difficult and challenging sometimes. And especially if you're coming in from a difficult situation, the tarot is also uncannily accurate sometimes, so it will be reflected. But within that also shows you the flip side of the coin. It shows you how to deal with that issue within that same card.
Right.
So there's like both light and dark in every card. Every card, yeah, in a reversal as well. It's always showing you an invitation or a lesson to be learned to help guide you through that specific archetype.
Exactly. Let us transition to runes, because I'm super curious as to how you use them and why you would use them over tarot and that sort of thing. So let's start with how you first discovered runes and how you connected with them?
I was trying to think and I'm not sure how I first discovered them. I guess just on somewhere along deepening my spiritual journey, and as I was learning more about these practices, runes they just came into my field of awareness somehow. And it was a similar thing to tarot, actually, where I was like, wow, there is like an ancient wisdom to the runes. There is something deeply, almost primal. It's like because they are very archaic, and in the way they look as well. And there's just something like they kind of cut through the noise. Whereas tarot is very rich and detailed and nuanced and it has a lot of layers, runes are almost rudimentary. They give like a broader perspective, a bigger picture view, and simpler, more direct answers. And yeah, when I saw them, I think something in the symbols, I was like, wow, this speaks to me. It could be also, again, maybe some sort of cultural heritage. They are from Northern European. They're an ancient Norse divination method.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be some kind of ancestral lineage there somewhere. I'm not sure, but it's an alphabet. So the runic alphabet, there's 24 letters of the one that's most in use today, which is called the Elder Father alphabet. Similar, almost like hieroglyphics. So each letter is an actual letter. You can use it to spell what was one of its main uses. It dates back from about the 1st century AD. And so it was used as an alphabet, and then also to create sigils and talismans, and using the whole alphabet, all 24 letters, as a divination method.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's cool. They can, they found many artifacts, even like graffiti. They found things, or it was used as like a signifier of, say, a crafts person, like almost like a signature, and things like that. But used a lot for talismans. The meanings behind them are heavily based on Norse mythology, which most people will be quite familiar now because of the Thor films.
Right,
so like
right.
Odin, who's like like the supreme god, like the father of gods, and he was the god of wisdom and was said to hang upside down on the yew tree of life for 9 days and 9 nights to gain access to the secret of the runes, and then he gifted this knowledge to people.
Oh, wow. That is so cool. I had no idea. That's so cool.
Yeah. And they was believed, and people still do as well, like each individual rune letter as well was believed to hold a lot of power. So yeah, you would like maybe draw a talisman, or if you had like an actual rune inscribed on a stone, say, to carry with you on a journey or during birth, through things that would have been back in the day quite perilous.
Right.
And then, also as a divination method.
Wow. It's got such a rich history, and that's something that is super interesting when it comes to all of these divination methods. When you were talking about the origin of tarot, and then now the origin of runes. For runes, it sounds like it is something that has been around much, much longer than tarot, in fact.
Oh, yes, much longer. Yes, about the 1st century AD at least.
Yeah.
But it was used across Northern Europe. It's like a Proto-Germanic language, so around at the time of like Old Latin. So when, these languages were being used and developed, I guess. And It went up to the Vikings developed, during the Viking ages, another one developed into the Younger Father, it's called, which only uses 16 letters. And that was used until the medieval ages, around the 9th century. But today, the one we use is the Elder Father, mostly.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that it's not actually more widely used in the present day, simply because, so my lineage on my father's side were from Baghdad in Iraq. And I know that the Vikings actually invaded, which is modern day Iraq. For example, my cousins have blonde hair and blue eyes. It's amazing when you think about the history and the influence of the Vikings and of that particular era. And it's fascinating to see how each sort of divination tool has made its way into various different cultures. And yeah, and I am surprised that runes have sort of not become as popular as, let's say, numerology or the tarot or anything like that.
And especially also with the revival of like pagan and Celtic influence as well. It is
Yeah.
runes have sort of like been swept under.
We will be right back with the Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to the Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. Well, and hopefully we're going to change that on this podcast today.
But and then also because of that, that is one of the things that does it. It could be sort of maybe like a vicious circle where it does make it difficult to learn about runes because they are lesser known. And when you are learning about runes, it is harder to find information on them and literature. And because they were an oral tradition and it's so old, not much has been written, and it's quite disjointed sometimes, or there's a lot of variation. And it's also very archaic, it's referencing things that were important at the time, like cattle and things like that.
Oh, sure.
It's not relevant to us now.
Right. I wanted to mention on your website, towonder.com, you have a section which is called Elysium Rituals. And I was perusing through it, and you have these beautiful e-guidebooks, essentially, that you can download, and it will go through the various different meanings of the runes and all sorts of information about how to do this. So I wanted to mention that just before we got into the overview of how to use runes, because I didn't want my listeners to think, oh gosh, I have to write all this down and figure it out. So don't worry if you are really interested in learning how to use runes, or if you are wanting to get a reading from Talisa, you can go to their website and you can download the guidebook and you can book a reading. So not to worry. But that being said, so let's dive right in so you can give us an idea of how exactly runes are used.
Yeah, that's actually why I made the guidebook, because it was so difficult to find information on them, and information that was presented in a legible way, in a way that was relevant modern life, and a way, and also that was in one place, because I would find maybe a little bit, it's like snippets here and snippets there. So I wanted to create a resource where everything was combined in like one beautiful, easy to read format that was also relevant.
Right.
Like any divination method, it will always be a combination of, let's say, traditional meanings. So what are like the largely agreed upon keywords, let's say, and they are quite varied sometimes. And there is also a lot of overlap because each rune is heavily influenced, well, all the runes were influenced by Norse mythology. And those stories are generally dealing with like harvest and war. There was like a few key things. So there's a lot of overlap as well. And so this is where some of the nuance will come in between which interpretation of each rune is relevant for you at the time. So there is a set list of keywords for each rune and traditional meanings for it. And then, of course, like with any other divination method, it will depend which one is like relevant in the moment, will depend on the question you've asked, the context, surrounding runes, and the person who's asking the question.
Are there actual set spreads that you will do with runes? So like in tarot, you have certain spreads for certain things. Is it the same in runes as well?
Yes, there are a couple of specific spreads. Again, there are also many out there, and you can easily adapt ones from tarot or make your own. In Norse culture, they heavily kind of worshipped, I guess, so the threes, multiples of threes held a lot of power. The number 3 was very magical, and this is, of course, not just in Norse cultures. So you will often find rune layouts in either multiples of 3 or odd numbers. So you can do, there is like the classic 3-card spread of tarot is called the 3 Norns in runes, and it's a similar, you will see, they are similar themes.
Interesting.
with these layouts, there is also like a big need to modernize them. So again, even in the layouts, you can see what would have been important for them back in those times. So you may come across some layouts where like the language is really old or is talking about things that are completely not relevant to this day and age. So you can, of course, feel free to adapt to what makes sense for you.
Right.
There is a runic cross, which is not like the Celtic cross. That one is just 6. And there is a runic V, which is also similar to the horseshoe spread. And actually, the significations of each position are pretty much the same. And so I wonder sometimes, this is also what surprised me because runes came first. I wonder sometimes, like, if there was any influence for tarot as well, especially like with the layouts. But we're not sure when layouts came exactly because they did originally start. So it's called casting. They used to cast runes by throwing them onto a special cloth, usually white, with your eyes. I think it was called because of this. Your eyes were to be cast up to the heavens, so as not to be like influencing them, and you were just relying on God's, the deities' wisdom. And then only the runes that fell upright so that you could see the letters inscribed on them were read. And many people still read like this. So you can, like, if you were to gather like all 24 runes in your hands and then just let them fall on a cloth, and then you would read the ones that have fallen upright, and that would be your spread.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Or then you can use an actual, it's called a layout in runes.
And so which method do you use typically?
I use layouts, and then there is one that was really popular, so a 9 one, and then also a 24 layout, which uses all the runes. And this was used like a year ahead, so this is something they would do on the beginning of their new year, and each rune would fall into a different position, signifying a different area of life. Similar in a way, I guess. Do you know Lenormand cards?
Yes.
So kind of in like a grand tableau, like maybe sort of more like that, where you're using all the runes, because there's only 24 as well. You have the capacity. It's easier to use all of them than like 78 of a tarot.
Right. Now, for those listeners who don't know the Lenormand cards, would you mind giving them a little snapshot of what that is?
Yeah, so Lenormand is another divination method, cartomantic, similar to tarot, but also similar. Like, for me, Lenormand bridges a gap between runes and tarot, actually, because Lenormand is like very direct and straightforward, and it will just tell you answers in a like very simple sentence. But Lenormand is used to create sentences. So you read the cards in pairs or triplets or larger tableaus, it's called. So if you were to put there's 36 cards out, and each position represents an area of life. And then the cards that falls in that position, you read them together. There's a layout that is done for runes the same. So there's 24 positions, 24 areas of life. And this is, going to be everything from your legal affairs to your romance, to your health, to wisdom learned, to difficulties, just everything that could be encompassed. And then the rune that falls in that position represents how that area will play out for you, like a snapshot for what could come.
I guess my next question would be, do you ever use, let's say, after you've cast the runes and you've gotten the message, do you ever use, let's say, a tarot card or an oracle deck for clarification? Do you use the two methods together?
I personally don't, but many people do. So to me, it's gotten to the point where these tools are kind of are like the portal, say, like the window through which the message needs to come through. But it's a bit difficult to explain. Like, when I see the runes that come up or the tarot cards that come up, like, I just instantly know in a second, like, the message that needs to come through. What is the current situation? What is the context? Like, it just all makes sense to me. So I haven't ever found the need to clarify with other methods, or just even use clarifying cards in general or extra runes. But many people do combine the two, and yeah, you absolutely can use them for another layer of nuance, really.
Right. I completely understand what you're speaking of, because in what I do currently, it's the same. So I don't actually even need to use tarot cards anymore for most of my readings, because at a certain point, you know the messages that spirit is giving to you, and you are intuiting it directly, almost like a channel, right? Like you're almost channeling the information. But I can tell you that that wasn't always the case for me. When I first started using tarot and really tapping into my gifts, I didn't really know properly how to use them, as well as to really trust what the universe was giving me was accurate. What the tarot cards did for me was give me that confidence that the messages I was receiving were actually, in fact, true and accurate, and they weren't just random thoughts in my head. That's one thing that I can tell the listeners right now, is that if you're just starting out using something like runes, using something like tarot, and in fact, if you needed to combine the two, or any way in which is going to get you to a point of trusting and understanding the message, is perfectly fine. Whatever method you decide to gravitate towards is definitely going to be the right method for you.
Yeah. No, like always what works best for you is what's best.
Exactly. And don't get discouraged if you're not necessarily hearing those messages directly, like Talisa and I are talking about right now. That comes with a lot of practice. It comes with time. It comes with cultivating your spiritual gifts. It comes with a lot of just experience with that. And so there are some people who can really tap into that right away, and some people
Mhm.
who it comes a little bit later, and it's all in the right divine timing for you.
Yeah, for sure. And it is also, it's a muscle. The intuition, like the more you use it, the more it strengthens, and also the more faith you give it, the more you surrender to it, and the stronger it grows. It's obviously easier said than done, but to just trust it, like don't second guess. And I find that sometimes where if you pull too many clarifying tarot cards, it could be like second guessing yourself. Like, know that the first thing that came into your head, that is right. Like, really give yourself the power of trusting yourself. Like, you really do know what's best in that moment. When you could have thought of anything, any signification, any meaning, but you thought of that one first. And that's how intuition works. It's without second guessing. It's without like thinking like, oh, but like, oh, is this the right one? The one that comes through straight away, like that is the right one. And then the more you practice, the louder it will become, and the stronger and the faster as well it will become, and the easier as well. Because in the beginning, you're unsure, you're like nervous, you're uncertain, you don't know. But just with time and with practice, it becomes a lot easier to trust yourself as well.
Absolutely.
And your intuition grows in other ways, in other parts of your life as well, so much. It's like crazy how it just like bleeds out into everything else as well. And that's actually a good way to help strengthen your tarot practice as well, is to use and trust your intuition in other aspects of life. And I think especially with difficult situations, when the mind tries to take over for your own safety, it's only worrying about you for your own good, but then it can get in the way sometimes of your intuition. And so if you can practice it in other, just that little inkling in your gut where you think like, oh, this isn't a good idea, or like, oh, I'm really excited for this, like just try testing, going with your gut and going with your first instinct, and it will strengthen in other ways throughout your life as well as your divination practice.
Exactly. And that is something that I discussed in the last episode, which is when you are in that space of having challenging situations, challenging energy, that is often the best time to reach out to somebody like you to get a session or a reading, so you can get that confirmation. Because when you're first starting out, if you are in that space and you don't know if the messages are accurate because you're really hyper emotional as far as challenging emotions, it can be, like you said, it can be very difficult to decipher what your intuition is telling you. So getting confirmation from a secondary party, or I even suggested, ask if you have a friend that does tarot, or that you're sort of working on your practice together. You can always ask another person to do it for you, because if you do it in that energy, it is incredibly difficult to decipher the messages sometimes, especially when you're just starting out. We will be right back with the Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to the Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio.
And the thing that I always say as well is that no divination method it won't actually tell you something you don't know. Like deep down, you already do know the messages that are coming through for you. You have maybe just not heard them, or have forgotten, or it's being clouded out by overly logical thinking, or anxiety, or whatever else. But it's one of those things, when you do a reading for someone, it just resonates, because truth recognizes truth. So they know, like you didn't know it before you heard it, but then you hear it and it suddenly clicks and you're like, yes, this makes so much sense to me. I get it now.
And likewise, when you hear something that is not resonating with you, you can absolutely feel that as well. So that doesn't typically happen, I think, with one-on-one readings, but I think when people listen to collective readings or something like that, it's you definitely have to use your discernment and decide, okay, so what is it that's actually resonating with me and what isn't, because you don't want to take on anything that isn't yours.
Yeah, and that's something, going back to what we said in the beginning as well, like all of this acts as a roadmap. You can then choose what to do with it, and no one or no divination method will ever know more than you do. They can just shine a guiding light, and then it's up to you whether what it's shining on or where it's showing you to go makes sense for you. If it resonates for you, you will always know ultimately what's best. Like, you are your greatest teacher,
right?
For sure.
Absolutely. So let's get into the reason why you would choose runes over tarot or other forms of divination when you are trying to get particular answers.
So one of the main things I would say, maybe, so if you're looking for answers, runes can be quite direct sometimes and simpler responses. They also offer a bigger picture, a broader overview, so they won't give you specific details or a lot of complexity or nuance. So if you have a complicated situation or something that there's like a lot of layers to, tarot would be more suited. But if you want to get like a broader overview of something, or maybe you don't have a specific question, even you just kind of want like a snapshot, or you want simpler, more direct answers that are sometimes easier to understand as well. Sometimes tarot can be a bit complicated. So runes offer that simpler, more direct answers and a broader picture view. And then also, I would say, if you are looking at it for not necessarily just questions, but as an exploration yourself for a divination tool you'd like to explore, I say just try everything out, because you never know what one is just going to speak to you most. So I would always recommend everyone to just try anything anyway, because it could be the one for you. And it might be a nice way, maybe if you have some ancestral heritage across Northern Europe, for a way to connect that way. Also, especially if older, more archaic traditions speak to you as well. If you have an interest in mythology, things like that, this could resonate more with you.
Yeah, that's super beautiful, because it sounds to me like people who may actually have a little bit of fear surrounding tarot or the messages that they may be receiving, because tarot can get very in depth, that runes might be a really good gateway into divination, because it's not going to be as specific. It's not going to be as potentially worrisome or scary going into it. And I do want to reiterate that I can tell you that tarot is never going to be scary for anyone, because Spirit will always give you the messages that you can handle right now in this moment. You will never receive a message that is something that is going to just cripple you emotionally. It's always going to be a supportive message. It's always going to be a way to help you in your life and not hinder you. So I just want to make that little statement first. But if you are still nervous about getting a tarot reading, runes sounds like it might be the right fit.
Yeah, and there's also you don't have any preconceived notions about it either. So one of the big reasons that people are hesitant about tarot is because of what you think you know of it from beforehand as well. Whereas runes is like it's a less heard of method as well. So you're not coming to it with any preconceived fears.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point.
I will say there are a couple of challenging runes, let's call them, but like nothing like what tarot can offer sometimes. But also a thing to remember is that any session or reading that you go to, like the point to go to have a reading or to do a reading for yourself is for guidance, and is to come out, with a greater sense of clarity and comfort and faith. You wouldn't come out of a reading feeling scared or what. The whole point is to come out of a reading feeling assured and with insight as well, that connects to yourself as well. It's a way to connect to yourself even if someone is reading for you, because like we said, you will find that you knew these answers all along. You just needed a little guidance to see them.
Absolutely. That being said, when it comes to interpreting the messages from casting runes, what are some of the challenges you can encounter in those interpretations? For example, one of the things we were talking about earlier, which was, if you are in an energy that is challenging yourself, maybe step away from the divination tools because the messages are going to be harder to interpret. When you're casting runes, what are some of the challenges as far as the spreads or as far as interpreting the different runes together? What have you encountered, or what have you found some of your students have encountered while learning this?
In reference to if you were in emotionally, let's say, charged moment where you don't feel like reading tarot would be a good idea for you, runes could be good in that situation because they will have almost like a softer
Right.
response. But the challenge with runes is because I think they are so archaic. So the keywords sometimes are not relevant anymore, or quite varied as well. But like one rune stone can have a wide variety of meanings and also overlap. So when you are maybe going beyond just doing readings and wanting to become more advanced in reading, I guess tarot has this similarity in some cards as well. Like, what is the difference between two runes specifically when some of their keywords are similar? So that can be a bit challenging. Finding information in general can be a little bit challenging. And also with the spreads, again, the language can be quite archaic sometimes or not relevant anymore. And also, it's not, I forgot to mention this, it's usually not read left from right. Right, it's right from left. So that's something to bear in mind. And then, for example, there's a 9-rune spread, and it's just, when you're looking at it, it's all over the place. It seems to follow no rhyme and reason as to, it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's just 4, 7, it's they're just all over. So if you want to learn the traditional layout, say, it can take some time to just get your head around what seems to us be quite disjointed numbering system, but you can also make your own layouts.
So when you're talking about some of the runes having similar meanings, is it similar to, let's say, if you're looking at tarot, let's say the 2 of Cups and the Lovers, you would look at both of those cards as a very loving relationship, as a very equal partnership, but they both have slightly different meanings depending on where they are in the spread. So is it similar to that?
Yeah. So, and then, as you become more comfortable with the full range of keywords, and with anything, then you'll begin to form your own personal relationship. So a certain rune will mean something to you as well, and you'll make your own meanings of them. They're a lot simpler. So, for example, there is Gabo, which is gift. So each letter also has like a one word translation. So they have like a main word. And then Gabo, gift, but this is like gifts given to you. So like something, a positive omen coming towards you, or gifts that you have yourself. So talents that you can then bestow upon others or giving to others. So like a giving and receiving, generosity. Within this is tied in joy, happiness, success, abundance, because these positive keywords are tied in with a gift as well. For example, there is another one called Sawillow, which is sun. But sun, like the sun card actually in tarot, is also success and abundance. But then that's where you see then the difference is also vitality in a sense of lightness and joy. The keywords can overlap in that way. Another thing that may be a bit difficult is the words themselves, the names themselves. They have several spellings because they're so old. They've passed through spelling variations. So sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to search for things even based on that. So maybe the spelling you're using, doesn't come up with it much, but then you find out, there's an alternate spelling for this, and that will come up more as well.
Right. You had mentioned that you can give a particular rune a meaning yourself, so what it means to you. And I find that is very much the same in tarot as well. I joke about, there was an oracle deck that I was using at one point in the very beginning of my journey, and I kept on getting this one card repeatedly. And the particular card, I just didn't understand the message in regards to the question that I was asking. And so I started getting really irritated. And so I basically said, okay, you know what, angels? That card no longer means what you think it means. It means this. And so if you want to give me this card, it's going to mean this meaning, right? It just became kind of a thing, which then I would laugh at, because every time they would give me the card, it would actually mean the meaning that I gave it. That is something that is super important for everyone to know, is that if there is something that you don't understand in a particular context, you can sort of give it your own meaning. And if that is going to be the meaning from here on out for you, then that's how you will interpret it. And that's how, when you go from different tarot readers, different readers in general, how each person is going to have their very unique interpretation of the tarot cards or of the runes, because they are so personal to you and what the meanings are.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why it's also important to pick a reader based on just if their energy vibes with yours, because they will be interpreting the message for you. As they say, the tarot never lies, but the interpretation changes from person to person. And also that's why you can, you can kind of shop around in a way. You go, like, I love going to tarot readers as well. I have readings from other tarot readers. I love seeing the way people interpret cards differently to how I would interpret them, maybe, or like a different layer of nuance as well.
And I often talk about that in regards to therapy. When you have a therapist, therapists usually go to therapy because they need to have that outside perspective, because when you are constantly always sort of in your own intuition and you do this for a living, you have a tendency to get into that groove of what you do, and it's a beautiful groove to be in. But if you are interpreting the messages sort of a similar way for yourself on a regular basis, you're absolutely right. Getting an outside perspective and getting a reading from somebody else can actually be really eye-opening, because they're going to be able to see something that you might not be seeing yourself.
And it's also a never-ending journey. So as you grow, your relationship with them grows. And I don't think it's something you ever stop learning. I still anyone else who is passionate, who has just discovered this, will also know, like, you can never get enough information. All I do is read tarot, astrology, rune books, podcasts. Like, everything I do is just consuming these divination methods, really. And I think it's a lifelong journey.
Absolutely, it is.
It's like adding more tools to your box. Every time you learn like a new interpretation, you're like, oh, that's interesting. And then it's just stored in the back of your psyche. And then maybe one time you're used to interpreting this card in like these set ways, and then in the moment on for a certain reading, actually this interpretation, actually, which happens to me quite a lot. So I always say like, oh, I usually interpret this card this way, but in this situation, I know that this card means this thing, even though I wouldn't normally interpret it this way. So certain interpretations will come out in certain moments based on when they're needed.
Absolutely. We will be right back with The Heart of You after a word from our sponsors. Welcome back to The Heart of You on Paris Underground Radio. The other really beautiful way that the universe works is, as you were talking about, when you are doing more research and you're learning more tools, I find that it always comes at exactly the right time. So if I happen to be learning something or reading a book or watching a YouTube video or something that I learned some little new tidbit of information, it just so happens that the reading that I have with a client the next week, that gets referenced, right? So it's one of those things where your guidance is constantly guiding you to the right bits of information right before you need them.
Yeah, you always hear what you need to hear when
exactly.
You need to hear it.
The last question I have for you is, let's say somebody would like to go and purchase a set of runes to start practicing. What recommendations would you have for how to choose the right ones? Because I've seen all kinds of different ones with, crystals and stones and various different types of materials. How would you recommend somebody to go and pick out something for themselves?
Like with most other methods, it's going to be what calls to you most. So as you're browsing, just the one that catches your eye and you're like, yes, this is for me. Generally, I'd say crystals is most popular. And for me, that adds a little extra special touch as well. But also wood is popular. You can make them yourself as well. You can get cards. If you can work with what works for you as well. If you like using cards, then you can get rune cards.
Oh, fantastic. I had no idea they had rune cards. That's really cool.
Yeah, so if you like crystals, you can get crystals, and then you can also tie that into the crystal meaning as well, because they come on all sorts of crystals. Or you can get, runes are so archaic, and traditionally they would have been on wood as well. And if you want to stick to that, they are quite earthy as well. They're so, like I was saying before, they're like quite primal in their carvings, their inscriptions. So if you want to keep to that earthy, primal feel, you can go for wood. But yeah, whatever calls to you, really.
And I do want to mention as well that just like any other divination tool, and this is something we covered in a previous episode as well, is, of course, when you get those runes home, make sure you are touching each rune to put your particular energy into those runes after you clear them. You do your clearing, make sure they are clear of any energy that isn't yours, and then you can infuse your energy with those runes so you are fully energetically connected.
Yes, for sure, especially if they're crystals. I hope it's a useful tool for people to explore, and it's illuminating for them. And I think it's a really nice way to connect. It's not just, you don't have to have, of course, ancestral lineage in Northern Europe for it. It's all our ancestors, it's just of times past. It's like it's 2,000 years old. It's nice to connect with something that just has been passed down for so long. So yeah, I would encourage everyone to give it a go. And like with any divination method, it's all serves a purpose in helping to strengthen your connection to your intuition, and as well as your guides or anything else, any other energy that you're working with.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And thank you for letting us know about this ancient divination tool that is something that people may not have known about previously. And I just want to remind everyone that you can schedule a reading with Talisa at Elysium Rituals, and her website is towander.com. And do you want to give us your social media as well so people can go and follow you there?
Yeah, so on Instagram and Pinterest as well, but Instagram is at Elysium Rituals. That's ELYSIUM Rituals RITUALS. And I do daily tarot pulls and weekly rune pulls on there as well.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Talisa, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this 2-part divination series. And I hope this has given you a little bit of clarity on divination tools. Thank you to Paris Underground Radio for producing this episode. And please feel free to head over to their social media, Paris Underground Radio on Facebook and Instagram. My name is Annette Deleu, and my website is infinitesoullove.com. And you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube at Infinite Soul Love 1111. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next week.